Hi, and welcome to another narration presented by yours truly, Cryptids Roost. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button. Don't forget to smack the ass of that subscription button as well. This will help with YouTube's algorithm and will help promote our channel more. And if you would like to support the channel and help make us grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. And don't forget to check out the merch store. All links are listed below. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, everyone. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. My job requires me to clean up Roadkill and hunt cryptids. This fantastic new series is written by author Jojo, a wonderful author over on Reddit's Nosleep. While I'm not at liberty to say which state has done so, I can tell you that around a year ago I picked up a job removing those corpses you see at the side of the road. Some are spotted quickly and the cleanup is as easy as picking up the carcass and chucking it. Sometimes the roadkill is left for days or hit by several cars. These cases are a pain in the ass. A lot goes into making sure your kids don't break out crying on your 5-hour road trip when they see Bambi at the side of the road. The work is quiet, people don't bother you, and other than an intercom on my dashboard telling me where to go, I have little reason to talk to anyone. I just traverse the highways in my truck that looks eerily similar to what horror movies would have you expect someone in my profession to be driving. In life, you go through changes. Not all of them are welcome, but they're going to happen whether you're ready or not. Just got to roll with those punches. That's what I'm doing. Scraping remains off 4 lanes isn't enough to pay the bills though, and it was around the time I was close to losing my home that a particular phone call gave me an interesting change. I can't remember the date, but 3 months ago I was approached with an offer that at first was nothing but humorous. It told me the line of work I was already in would seamlessly integrate into the work they had lined up for me. They were right. I was used to a long ride, solitude, and most importantly, I knew how to dispose of an animal. With cautious hesitation, I agreed, and not a day passed before I received my first call. The encounter nearly made me quit on the spot until I saw the pay. I could afford a nice shiny pickup truck, but I can't imagine the use of owning something like that and spraying the thing down every night. Besides, old Elvis had been keeping me company ever since I pulled my first animal remains off the black tar. Even more so, ever since my first night with that thing, I wised up and began to teach Elvis some new tricks. The truck ain't pretty on the outside, but it could outrace 80% of the cars I'd seen passing me by. There's no need for me to elaborate much on my time back then. I don't think either of my employers would be too keen on recounting all that, nor would they like what I'm doing now, but for the sake of compilation. I'm writing my jobs down from now on. You see, from 9 to 5 I do nothing but wait until some poor animal's day is up until time or nature kills it. Once that shift ends though, I sit by my radio and wait. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, until I hear faint static kick in and give me the location, situation and the cryptid I'd be hunting that evening. You've no doubt heard stories of some of these cryptids you can come across, and some are even famous. For every cryptid you've heard of, there's 10 more waiting in the bushes. Those are the ones that I'm called to take care of. Not all of them are out to harm humans, and some can exist peacefully with the surrounding ecosystems. But when one goes rogue or harms their biome, that's when I'm called in. Tonight I was called to take care of a swift bastard called the Mile Wolf. They all have cute nicknames like that. The Mile Wolf was once thought to be in a rare category of cryptids that were singular in nature, meaning it was only one of its kind. It wasn't until 2 attacks were sighted 10 miles apart in the time frame of 5 minutes. These things are fast, but not that fast, thank God. They're agile and cunning, so when one is spotted, it becomes a priority. They attack humans for food and seemingly for sport, and also feed on any species of wolf that happens to inhabit the area. The attacks resemble that of a pack of wolves, with how vicious the claw and bite marks can be. So after receiving the call, I made my way to the cold storage where I kept any clean roadkill and pulled a deer from the freezer. Heavy bastard. I located the sighting on a map, some backwards car path that was primarily used by lost foreigners. It had one way in and out, making it a perfect road to plot a trap on, so that's what I did. Then after gathering the necessary supplies, I chucked everything into the truck bed and took off. By the time I finally hit the road, the sun had long since left the sky, and it was approaching midnight. This is typically the best time for hunts. The fewer people the better, but if you wait too long, you risk the thing hauling up for the night. Mile wolves are very adept at making themselves invisible, and can even trick passing observers into thinking they just witnessed a normal wolf. The mile wolf gets its name from its body structure. If you were looking at it head on, all you would see is a very tall wolf. Its legs are thin and stretched, giving it a malnourished appearance. Their height could dwarf the extinct dire wolves. I've heard of mile wolves that have reached up to 6 feet in height. I'm thankful I've never seen one of those. The community is still split on whether or not mile wolves have a hierarchy, like regular packs do. If they do though, that 6-footer was no doubt the alpha. Their tall stature isn't their main feature. No, it gets weirder. The mile wolf will rarely be seen from the side, but if you were to catch a glimpse, you would see a long, cylindrical-like stomach and chest. They've been compared to snakes and worms, but I see a stronger resemblance to ferrets. They can reach over 10 feet in length, and you can tell they're hungry if the middle of their tube-like body is sagging. If that's something you manage to see, it's already too late for you. As I've said before, these suckers are fast. It doesn't matter if they're running away or towards you, they are faster. Their bodies allow them to slink through the forest as if they're made of water. If you wanted to kill one, you'd have to do so swiftly, but even that wouldn't be easy. For whatever reason, all these cryptids have accelerated healing, and the mile wolf is among the worst of them. Like the worms they resemble, a limb or even half its body will begin to regrow after being severed. There is one thing that can halt the healing completely, and it's far too cliché for my taste, but it gets the job done. Going over the plan in my head, I pulled up to my destination, about halfway through the secluded trail, and turned the truck off. I withdrew several small speakers from the back of the truck and placed them at random positions on the road. On the side of the road, I placed a uniform row of rusty iron and covered them with leaves. Mile wolves will not make a sound as they approach you. If you are hunting one, you must act fast and quiet, or the tables will turn before you even realized you're drawing your last breath. Their teeth are some of the sharpest I've ever seen. They would slice through a tree faster than a chainsaw if one had the mind to do so. Reaching into my truck, I pulled the double-barrel shotgun I bought my first day on this job. It and Elvis got together well. Then my hands found the revolver and dropped a single but very expensive bullet into the chamber. I placed them on the road, laying them gently next to a ghillie suit. Then the final piece was dragged from the truck bed. Several space heaters were focused on the deer. The stench it gave off was horrendous, but it was powerful, and I didn't have time to pay it mind. I placed it on in the road, a safe distance from the speakers, iron, and my own supplies. I stuck the deer's stomach and pulled, the fine skin giving away easily. I felt a flow of red run past my hands. Quickly I rushed to the open door of my truck and took one heavy last breath just to center myself. My hand pressed hard on the car's steering wheel, and the horn cried loud into the vast silence of the night, bouncing through the trees. Slamming the door, I swiftly made way to the ghillie suit and threw myself under it. I laid on the road, watching the deer's body, moonlight as my only source of light. I could see it reflecting off the pool now surrounding the deer. Mile wolves are cautious. I had no doubt that it was sizing up the deer. I had no doubt it wanted the easy prey. Before I knew it, a shadow lunged onto the lifeless deer. Ugly sounds of gnawing like ripping sheets of paper could be heard coming from the mass of meat. My fingers wrapped around the grip of my shotgun. There was going to be no opening. I was just going to have to go for it and hope everything worked out. You have to take leaps of faith like that a lot in my line of work. Going over the plan one more time in my head, I readied and calmed myself. It was time. Like a maniac, I sprung from under the ghillie suit and readied my shotgun. Before I even raised the barrel, it was already aware of me. Its long, slender body began contorting to face me. I didn't have the time, so without a clear shot, I pulled the trigger. The recoil jarred me for a minute, but I could see I did some damage to its legs. The mile wolf swung away from me after being shot. It was attempting to flee. It made it several feet, and a large hum emitting from the speakers, frightening the wild wolf as it picked a new direction, and another speaker went off. It made a frantic sprint towards my truck. My finger clicked a small rubber button on my keys, and the lights of the truck shone bright, piercing the dark. The road lit up. I could see the mile wolf's albino white hair that was standing on end like it was a pissed off cat. Along with the lights, the radio and the speakers mounted atop good old Elvis chimed a wonderful tune of harsh static. The mile wolf retched and ran towards the side of the road. The biggest part of this job is having foresight. You are hunting the things that go bump in the night. Most of them are still animals though, and their actions can be predicted. As I watched the mile wolf clamber to the side of the road, and as I heard the harsh clamping of the row of bear traps, I knew I was chalking up another successful hunt. The thing's frantic movements had been its undoing. If just one or two of its legs had been caught, it could have gnawed them off and I'd have no chance of catching up. But it had slipped and the traps closed on its stomach and neared just below its neck. As I walked over, I pulled out the revolver. If left be, this thing would recover and be angrier than ever. It looked up at me and flashed bright green eyes, giving off several cries for mercy. But the mile wolf is crafty. If you show it mercy, it will not return the favour. I had more than enough time. I aimed up the perfect shot, and with the pull of the trigger, the hammer brought down and ejected the bullet. A gleaming oval of silver flew from the barrel and straight into the mile wolf's head. The only way to really kill one of these is to stop the regeneration completely. Silver is the cheapest compound known to do such a thing. Still, ain't cheap. The rest is no different from my morning job, just a little more intimate. I removed the traps and threw the corpse into the back of my truck, covering it with a ghillie suit. And after packing all my supplies, I hopped in and began the long drive home. I am tired, but I am alive, and there is a very long wolf hanging in cold storage. I keep the cryptid bodies around for a while before burying them, because just like the roadkill, they have their purpose to serve. Part 2. It's hard to keep a social life with a job like this. Never mind not having the time between both occupations. Trying to wipe the scent of dead roadkill or some creature's blood isn't an easy task. I honestly make good money, but I'm not sure what I'm making it for. My routine is to wake up and try my best to acquire some semblance of fresh. I'll go a couple of rounds with the punching bag. Sometimes I'll just sit and look at it. Memories can be draining. Some people work so they can live. More and more I'm discovering that I'm living to work. I find more comfort in the rides too, and from that I do sitting in my house. I won't beat around the bush either. There are nights after a rough hunt that leave me feeling like a badass, and I miss that feeling. As far as the 9 to 5 goes, it was a fairly slow day. I was even called to 2 separate places that ended up being just sick animals. I have to contact animal control in those scenarios, and then it's out of my hands. There was a skunk discarded into the brush off the interstate that a number of drivers were complaining about. The smell wasn't all that bad. Lord knows I've experienced worse. Squatting over the poor thing, I observed its wounds and considered what could have afflicted them and ignored the skunk's defense mechanisms. Most cryptids you will run across have their senses enhanced as they've evolved to avoid detection and hunt more dangerous prey. If I wanted to find the cause of the skunk's death, I would have to open it up, and that just wasn't going to happen. As I picked it up, however, it felt light, and its bones had clearly been cracked. Throwing it into the truck bed, I thought of the colossal viper, a massive snake that is able to, through sheer muscle power, burrow underground. It's presumed to either lack the ability to smell or deny it as a repellent. It will constrict its prey and pull its blood out using its fangs. The sheer strength of the thing would leave any animal broken. Wouldn't it be too outlandish to assume I'd be getting a call about it in the near future? If it came as close as it did to civilization, it could be a problem. How would I deal with something like that monstrosity? Lucky for me, my prey this night was something a little more docile and smaller than some Hollywood horror snake. I took the day's work and disposed of whatever I couldn't use, but the skunk went into storage. Its smell could be useful in the future, waste not and such. I got a call from my employer a few hours after getting home. It was a simple job, one that, if finished quickly enough, would allow me to take another. There are these little creatures called jobbins. I didn't name them. I have no idea where the name came from. As peaceful as a cryptid can be, they are almost kind in fact. You see, they'll sing for you. It's not a song you will enjoy, and for one reason or another, it'll enable you to enter sleep. Or if you're already sleeping, you'll be unable to wake up. Something about the frequency locking your brain state of awake. These are easy to get rid of. You just have to make them know that their presence is unwelcome. The reason I was even called in for this is that the caveat that comes with the jobbins. They are so docile that they are easy pickings for larger prey, mainly cryptids. So when the big boys hear the jobbins singing, they will culminate on the area in search of them. Even the apex of the cryptids can't resist their call. Makes you wonder what they taste like. I can tell you now, if the jobbins were to attract the attention of the ever-exclusive BF, I'd be going radio silent for a few days. That is one job I'm not willing to take. My rule is if something can chuck a tree at me, I'm going to avoid it. So, like any rational hunter, this is a job I jumped on quick. Easy money, no fuss. I drove until I saw the distinct red light the jobbins give off. The best visual I can give you is, imagine red lightning bugs with tiny little feelers. Their singing is created by the rapid movement of their wings. God, is it annoying to hear a whole cluster of them. I wrapped a towel around the nearest branch I could find and doused it in lighter fluid with a dab of vanilla extract. It has to be straight from the bean, nothing artificial. Lighting it on fire, I made my way to the group, waving it around like I was trying to knock down cobwebs. The group of jobbins' song grew louder as they scattered into the woods. I'd have to leave the stick burning on the ground in case they returned. Smelled a bit like homemade cookies. Life would be much easier if each hunt exhibited the same degrees of simplicity. It was actually pretty watching their lights dance into the darkness. These creatures used to be a larger concern. People would mistake the glow of their bodies for the glowing of red eyes peering at them. They believed the song to be some howl to call a pack or to signify what they had found dinner. Nope, just very large bugs. I stuck around the site, sitting in my truck, to make sure that nothing unsavory had followed the group of jobbins. Thankfully, I was able to leave that site without any incident. My next call came through the radio as I was leaving the site. The place was several dozen miles out, and I'd be cutting it close with the morning light. Luck so had it that I don't work my morning job tomorrow, and this cryptid is a very hyper one, to a fault. So I shifted Elvis into gear and made my way. Guided by my headlights, I watched the side of the roads. Not only did I not want to avoid causing roadkill, knowing what a pain in the ass it is, but a lot more dangerous fellas will attack cars when they're as alone as I was. A handful of hours passed before I reached my destination. Another stroke of luck was that the general supplies I had were enough to handle this hunt, so I didn't need to stop at home. I rolled up on a farmer's driveway. Hopping out, I was greeted with a thick and commanding voice. This man had been tending to the farm since he was 18. A worn and weathered face relayed to me those youthful days was many years ago. He informed me that he saw a small creature in his field and that it was leaving barren circles of corn. We don't normally discuss with clients unless their information is pertinent, but some of the tough-stomached ones don't mind a quick conversation. I assured him I'd take care of it and even jested that I'd try to avoid setting the field on fire. He told me that would be ideal and gave me a brief history of the cryptids' activities. With that, I headed into the field, supplies in tow. The small beam of my flashlight attempted to illuminate my way, but it seemed every ray was met by the cornstalk's resistance. It was hard to keep track of time. The field was so monotonous and the sky was still so dark. I had at least a good 2 hours before sunlight. I was pleased to make such good timing. During my walk, I made sure to note the location of the clearings the farmers mentioned. After passing my third one, I heard a clicking noise to my right, and at this time slowed my pace and flicked my flashlight off. Brushing aside sticks of corn as gently as I possibly could, I closed in on the rapid click. It's the same noise you'd get smacking dominoes together. The noise wasn't incredibly loud, but even as I stood just a few feet from it, I could see its faint outline through the obstructing vegetation. The furball was chewing away on a stalk of corn, devouring it from the bottom up. The less aggressive of cryptids tend to get names that lean towards cute. This is to sway the community's opinion on them. Things like jobbins, sugar creeps, and this here furball are typically herbivores. On rare occasions, however, a furball can become territorial if it finds a bountiful food source like the one we are in. Even though I had become still, it halted its feeding and became aware of me. Furballs have an unparalleled sense of sight. Looking at me, this thing could see me just as clear as if the sun was directly upon us, while all I could see was a tangle of outstretching thin tendrils that made up its hair. A furball, I could see the stalk of corn being clutched by its short stick-like limbs. It wasn't going to take long before it lunged at me. Furballs are typically harmless, but this one has been terrorizing the livestock and the farmers' daily operations, not to mention ruining large plots of the crop by eating them. They aren't something I can just put a bullet into. Their bodies are 90% hair. Even the limbs are made from longer, harder fibers of hair. I'd only get one shot before it scurried off, and I wouldn't be able to trap it like I did my last hunt. No, this one was going to be trying to chase me. Quickly I flicked my flashlight in its direction to agitate it and began to run away. I could hear the tumbling line of dominoes as its short legs paddled after me. Furballs are bundles of energy just as much as they are fluff. Their movements are sporadic and unpredictable. Whenever it caught up, it would jump across my path and take a swing at my legs, or get brazen and leap to my chest. I had to wince and ignore the slicing of flesh whenever it managed to land a hit on me. I was sure to wear something loose to snag its attacks. Foresight. It only came up to about my thighs. With its height, so much of the strikes were around my ankle. It felt like running through an upset rose bush. I continued though, as if I stopped I'd get the worst of it for sure, so my arms and legs kept pumping, cool air pressing my wounds. Just when I thought my knees might buckle under the strain, a minor blood loss, which I'd never been good with, go figure, we came across a larger circular clearing where all the stalks had been ripped up and eaten for the furball's dangerously high metabolism. Reaching into the pocket of my blue jeans, I pulled out a pill bottle sized cylinder of metal. My finger reached into the metal pin and pulled it loose. Straining my body as much as I could, I whipped the stun grenade high above the cornfield. I hoped it was far enough to avoid any ignition. Once thrown, I spun around and threw myself to ground, burying my face in what was left of the cornstalks and pulling my shirt over my eyes. Even with all that, my eyes squeezed tight, my eyelids still illuminated a bright pink, and my ears still rang heavy from the blast. I'd be sure to apologise to the farmer for stirring his livestock. My issues were nothing compared to the furball's hypersensitive eyesight. It would be rendered useless for a good while. When you have something as efficient as the furball's eyes are, you tend to lean on it. That and its energy was spent chasing, and it didn't have enough energy now to even try stumbling away, even in some haphazard direction. The quickest and most painless way for me to kill it was by just letting it starve. They have to eat pretty consistently, or their active metabolism shuts down in around 30 minutes and dissolves what little muscle mass they have. It sounds terrible, but it really is a quiet, quick way for them to pass on, and if I had the choice, that's the one I go with. I've heard enough horror stories about hunters that like to play with their hunts, drag it out. That's not who I am. So I sat with it, watching his fur swaying with each gust that rushed through the cornfield, accompanied by a soft rustling. As his body was shutting down, the arms and legs began to unravel and resemble the rest of its hair. The sun was coming up by then, and I had actually forgotten their fur is brown, not black like the night suggests. When his body had given up searching for fuel, I watched his hair separate from the form and drift into the morning's winds until nothing was left. Nothing but its eyes, the only part of its functioning body that wasn't in some manner made up of hair. I don't like killing most of the cryptids I come across. Hell, if there were more peaceful solutions, I would pursue them. Cryptids, they end up taking people from their family one way or another. Even the jobbins can keep someone asleep so long that their body gives up, similar to the furball that had been across from me. I have to stop these situations before they occur. I once lacked foresight, but no longer. I cleaned up the scene, ears still ringing. I placed the furball's glass-like eyes into a plastic bag. They would be iced in the cooler. Couldn't help but notice the clearing looked like a damn lot from Crop Circle. Aliens, what a joke. Typing all these cryptids names reminded me I haven't actually introduced myself yet. My name is Jack. Part 3. Some cryptids are only classified as such for sake of convenience. There are several categories you'll come across. Physical cryptids are your most common. That's where you get your Mile wolves and your Loch Ness monsters. This category makes up the majority of my calls, but almost all of them can be killed with minimal effort. Then you have intangible cryptids. You could technically call these things ghosts, but they are just a subset of creatures that seem to exist without a form. I've only ever had to deal with one of these. It was shortly after I first began this job. I was called to the suburbs to a nuclear family's ranch house. When I arrived, the scene looked like it was straight out of The Exorcist. All their belongings were thrown to the ground, and parts of the walls were dented. The kids were beside themselves. It was like the lichen collie. A very interesting study. It creeps the notion of its existence into an underdeveloped mind, mostly children. Slowly it manipulates more and more around the child until they are either convinced they have an imaginary friend or they believe a monster is in their closet. From there it can begin attempting to manifest itself into a more physical plane. Some of these guys will make you question the world around you, but it's a slippery slope and one I avoid. These type of cryptids require more and more out-of-the-box solutions. For example, while the mother pulled her children from the house to avoid the lichen collie, me and the father put on a show. The lichen collie always appears the same no matter the host. It shows itself initially as a yellow teddy bear, but as the child interacts with the lichen collie, the bear will stretch, its limbs contort in a sick attempt to imitate a human form, and its button eyes sink deep into the plush skull. The bear's skin will turn from a bright, vibrant yellow to a dirty tan. Its fur will be matted and ripped off in patches. Before I arrived at the house, I had stitched together a bodysuit that resembled the lichen collie as much as I could. I'm no tailor, but it was enough. I pulled the suit on and walked by a few windows to show the children I was inside the house. I made my way to the front door and stepped out, doing my best impressions of a thoughtless form I just walked down the sidewalk. The children were crying and begging for their mother to run with them. Just as one of the children were about to take off, the father tackled me from behind and slammed me onto the pavement. I told him to sell it, but the bruises from hitting the sidewalk remained on my elbow for what felt like weeks. He spouted lines about how I could never scare his family again and how I was going to jail for a long time. The bear mask I had made was then pulled off, revealing my face to the children. Staring at the little girl, I could see the gears turning. The bear she had been seeing wasn't some psychic vampire. It was just some weirdo in a costume who was going to jail for the rest of their life. She was no longer convinced the lichen collie was anything more than that, and as such, it would vanish from her thoughts. Other cryptids act similarly to the lichen collie, but do so in more of an immediate physical fashion. These are affliction cryptids. In this category are things like fast jackets, hornet doves, and the calvia contaminant. Very few things can shut down an entire mile radius as a calvia contaminant can, and that was the subject of my call tonight. For a rare night, I wasn't going to need much physical prowess to deal with a cryptid, so after I had obsessively treated my wounds, furballs can be dirty little things, I started preparing for the hunt, although cleanse would be more of an accurate word. The call had informed me the inner city had several blocks shut down and under quarantine. Victims were reporting advanced flu-like symptoms, and the skin was showing signs of a rapid decay at a cellular level. Sightings of bizarre animal behaviour and appearance were also a cause for concern. Me and my employer knew that simply quarantining the area wouldn't suffice. All it would take is one rat slipping out to infect another area. I threw on a heavy hazmat suit and headed out. The more time I wasted, the more I risked a city-wide infection. Like I said, Elvis can haul ass, and with me driving the roads as much as I do every day, I have pretty good intuition on which ones I can press the pedal down on. Elvis roared down the side streets. I didn't bother checking the side of the road. If something wanted to jump out at me, Elvis would be sure to take care of it. The bag of supplies resting on the passenger seat rattled and clanged with every bump Elvis took on. I don't normally venture too far into the city. I used to though years ago. I would spend entire weekends just fooling around. That life is something I've had to leave far behind, and memories of it served me little purpose, but at the very least I knew where I was going. I'd find the afflicted area shortly after entering the city. It wasn't hard to spot all the yellow tape and no entry signs littered around. I parked a few blocks away before leaving. I had scrubbed the hell out of Elvis. He looked cleaner than the day I bought him. If there was even a hair of something that was once organic around the infection site, then I would just cause more problems than I solve. The place was in a complete shutdown. Even the street lights had been shut off. The city must have blacked out part of its grid, which was smart. Sounds and light could attract things like insects, things the calvia contaminant absolutely love. Carefully, I made my way from building to building, trying to find the source of the contaminant. This affliction cryptid works similar to the hive mind of bees. If it weren't for that, it'd probably be an extinction level cryptid running rampant from state to state. Unfortunately, there is no known cure other than shutting down the hive mind before it takes too many victims. The source will send out a mist of spores that will attach to any organic life and start to absorb it for energy that will then be converted into more spores. The whole quarantine zone had a thick green hue to it, as though I was swimming through swamp water. I could see the semi-intelligent spores swirling from house to house as I was. They were looking for a meal. The Calvia contaminant was aware of my presence as the cloud grew ever so thick around me. The spores were looking for any imperfection in the suit. I could hear rats and other small critters scurrying about. I came across one such rat convulsing in the corner of a shut-down mini-mart. Its skin was being eaten away in several spots, revealing its bones and inner workings. Each hole was outlined by an almost neon green light. As the contaminant eats away, it glows from the energy it receives. This, however, was not the host, so I moved on. Buildings were either completely vacant or had small animals I would have to stop and observe. If they were small enough, I could just move on, but anything that could host the membrane would have to be examined. This includes getting really up close and personal with the inflicted and cutting it open to get a good look. Or if the decay was severe enough, I could just tell from a glance that nothing was abnormal inside. I knew people were sick and on the verge of death, so I tried to hurry, but something as simple as tripping up or snagging my suit on a loose nail would cause the whole hunt to be a bust. After a few blocks had been cleared, I was convinced I had missed something, or just wasn't thorough enough with what I did come across. I only had a few houses left. I figured I could clear them and just double back. I found something rather unexpected though. The decaying body of another cryptid was being converted to energy. It was just lying on the sidewalk. Another mile wolf laid at my feet, this one smaller than the last by at least a foot. I cursed myself for not bringing the revolver from my truck so I could give this thing a swift death. Until I cleared the contaminant source, this one would have to suffer the waging war of its regeneration and Calvia's feeding process. At least the virus didn't latch onto the marlwolf. The Calvia contaminant has a nasty habit of making its epicenter host somewhat immortal. As I stood observing the marlwolf, not wanting to get too close in case it had enough energy to spring up and attack the nearest piece of meat, I heard a familiar clacking in the street behind me. Slowly, I turned to face what I swiftly knew to be the epicenter host. The large adult buck before me stood with a vapor of green spores pluming from its wounds. The buck stared at me like I had my high beams on, its ears twitching at every scuff I made moving forward. I had no idea how I was expected to handle something so massive and powerful, let alone get to the source inside it. I could just barely see it as I carefully approached the buck. Inside one of the open sores, adorning the massive buck's stomach, was an obnoxiously green, tumorous mass clinging to the buck's intestinal tract. The virus needed to be soaked in a flammable delivery of antibiotics, heavy ones, which needed to be set aflame by direct contact with an open flame. How I was going to do any of this was beyond me. Each time I closed in on the buck, it would turn and gain several more feet of distance between us, which was honestly more favourable than the muscled Goliath goring me through with his massive antlers. They were intricate and imposing. This guy was for sure an alpha male. Poor thing. My attempts at a peaceful approach weren't working as I was running out of time. The people in hospital beds were running out of time. Those around them didn't know the infected were exhaling clouds of spores so small in number that they were barely visible, were running out of time. I knew something about my appearance was throwing it off. I knew what that something was. It wasn't hostile towards me, but it was cautious of something it didn't know. Any attempt to speed up was no doubt going to result in the buck just trotting off. The virus has no effect on the host's cognitive functions, so the buck was going to act how it always had. It's sights like this that eats away at me. Such a proud and strong member of the ecosystem was reduced to nothing but a carrier. Its skin a patchwork of brown and green linings. Its neck only minutes away from being unable to support the weight of its antlers. Sometimes on this job you have to forsake every safety measure you've built up. You have to take a gentle approach, like putting on a show to get a little girl to know the bad man is gone. Sometimes you have to be the bad man. I clasped my hands around the hood of my hazmat suit once white, now stained a deep green, with the patches of spores stuck to it. Lifting up, I felt the spore-filled air swirling around my head. Every inhale felt like I was breathing soup. I tore away the rest of my suit until I was standing in just my t-shirt and jeans. The virus was in me now, filling every organ and pore the spores could wiggle their way into. It was warm, and within minutes the spores would begin feeding. Luckily, the lining of human organs is tough for them to get through, so I had a little time before irreversible damage occurred. Cautiously stepping forward with an outstretched arm, I closed the gap between me and patient zero. Its body made the motions to turn, but with a few clicks, like I was calling a cat, I acquired its attention until I could see my reflection in its eyes. Gently I brushed what patches of intact fur I could find until the buck was motionless. Freehand grabbing the bottle of liquid, I continued soothing the buck. The lid slipped off and the antibiotics applied directly to the green mass. Best efforts were kept to keep the liquid from directly impacting the buck's remaining nerves. It would surely set the beast off. I had forgotten the flare. It was taped to the hazmat suit. I backed up, clicking once more, and the buck, thank God, it followed. We danced together until I felt the suit at my feet. Kneeling down, I picked up the red flare and cracked it. A bright red cast its light on me and the buck. Then the light disappeared as it was being shoved into the calveated contaminant. Sparks of it would flick and burn onto my hands, but I had to remain steady until the flare burnt out. It was reacting with the antibiotics, stripping its exterior of the viscous liquid that caused the infection and boiling the interior until all the spores had turned into an inactive mush. Shortly after, the buck dropped to the ground, its antlers smacking against the pavement. The green spores around me began dropping just the same. I felt bad for the buck, I really did. But if you need some solace, I could see that not even the virus was able to eat away at its impressive show of antlers. Body feeling like hell, like it did back when I would have to go 10 rounds with more than just a punching bag, I grabbed the suit, now completely useless, and pulled the green mess from inside the buck. It was dormant now, but inside the slush of spores was a highly potent poison. This might be useful with handling future cryptids. I then made my way to the truck. The authorities would discover on their own that the area was clear, and I'd be called in the morning to remove the animals. I'd have done it tonight, but my energy was quite literally drained. When I arrived at the truck, I noticed that its driver's side door had been left completely open, which is something my neurotic mind would never do. I searched the interior and found nothing missing, until on a whim I checked where I stored my revolver. Instead of a shining metal handgun, I was left with a small silver pellet, one I had forgotten to recover from the mile wolf hunt. I know when to leave a situation, and when I happened to glance at my passenger side window to see a distant pair of yellow orbs watching me, I left the scene. Even on the drive home, I could see the same pair of yellow eyes every few miles. Once I got home, on my doorstep was a shining metal revolver, or as I now saw it, a warning. Part 4. Despite having work in the morning, after jotting down the events of last night, I spent a good amount of time just holding the revolver and twisting the silver between my fingers. I went over my ever-expanding knowledge of cryptids to try to decipher what could be sending a message to me. In the time I've been working, not once has that work followed me home. Animals don't tend to hold grudges, and while cryptids' behaviour can be unique, I've never heard of something like this. Not only was the culprit smart enough to target me specifically, but it must have been watching me for a while. It also had to have a ridiculous amount of speed, or have an alternative mode of transportation. Intangible cryptids are capable of disappearing and reappears, but are typically bound to one area. Between the time I parked and the time I returned to the truck last night, maybe something around the speed of a marwolf could cover the distance. Bigger maybe. Lost in my thought, I failed to notice the sun creeping through my window, so my biggest threat tonight was a complete lack of sleep. The telephone ringing nearly threw me off my chair, but I was pleasantly surprised to discover some other poor soul was going to have to clean up what was left of the contaminant mess. Hopefully the marwolf didn't decide to stick around. I would be on highway patrol, which was a godsend. I drove from spot to spot, doing the usual, except this time around I was skeptical of every vehicle that followed me around too many turns. I kept pulling over just to see if they would drive past me. They all did. Around halfway through my shift, I stopped into a diner to grab a quick cup of coffee. I'd need several to stay awake. As I was sitting at the table, a waitress walked over to me and placed a cup of coffee down and a plate stacked with pancakes. When she noticed the bewildered look on my face, she mentioned that someone had covered the bill for me. I questioned her, but she didn't get a good look at him, only remarking the man had told her that I had been through a long night. I started scanning the diner, but she said he left right after paying for the food. Didn't order anything for himself. Against my better judgment, I obeyed the rumble from my abdomen and ate the pancakes. Whoever this man was, he was trying to send a message. If he wanted to kill me, he knew where I lived. At least I know it's not some cryptid. Maybe he was at the Calvia site and saw me pull in. Did he orchestrate the infection? To what ends would someone take out several blocks of life like that? The alarm on my phone alerted me when my break was done, and I quickly poured the coffee down my throat. A tingling burn went all the way to my chest. The train of thought I had to end there. A decent haul of bodies went by without any more issues, and then my shift was over. I had just enough time to head home and take a power nap, keeping the radio next to my head. I drifted off to the static. The universe took some form of mercy on me, and I didn't get a call for another 3 hours. I didn't wake up feeling refreshed and renewed when the chatter on the radio woke me, but I had gotten enough to get me through my next hunt. Some mansion had a cryptid of sorts haunting its premises. My employer gave me all the known details, and I gathered up my supplies. I didn't need much this time around, just some heat-resistant clothing and a breathing apparatus. After a brief delegation, I decided to leave the Magnum behind. If I needed a gun, my shotgun was always around. Tires spun and I headed out. Before I knew it, I was sitting outside the mansion. I got out and made my way to the house. The door was locked, but that was only a momentary issue. Walking inside felt like I had stepped into a furnace. Only moments after entering and I was sweating. My grip on my shotgun felt loose as beads of sweat ran between my palm and my gun. I could see a decent amount of the house from where I was standing, and what I needed to find wasn't on the ground floor. When I made my way upstairs, I was met with a cryptid. It stood facing me, not because I had shown up though. It likely had been standing there for a while. Salem children. It wouldn't attack me, but if I stayed in the heat it generated for too long, I might as well have fallen victim to a house fire. These poor souls are said to be the physical manifestation of hatred felt by children being burned for witch accusations. I was a bit lost though. Normally they only surface when the ground is being disturbed or there is a similar magic around. The house looked like it was there for a number of years and there was no signs of something like remodelling. The Salem child and I locked eyes for a few moments. Its eyes are nearly hypnotic. They're as wide as tennis balls and devoid of any ocular features. They only have the appearance of embers, like when you blow on wood to feed the embers on a campfire. The fire in his eyes was replicated along his black ashen skin. The flames ran through its veins, replacing his blood. Otherwise, it looked like a normal child, coming up about 3 feet and a little pot-bellied. It calmly focused its gaze on me. I gave it a nod and began walking from room to room. The only way to kill the Salem child is to kill its source of power, similar to a Calvia. The house remained perfectly intact despite the heat, and nothing was out of place. I didn't even consider that I had spotted a pair of cars parked in the driveway. I didn't take that into account until I walked into one of the children's rooms to see the child and his father huddled in the corner. If you're going to be a hunter like me, one of the first things you should know is that you'll have to deal with loss. Whether you hear the news that one of your fellow hunters had lost to their encounter, or you held sympathy for the cryptids, as I do. The hardest though is when you can't save the victims. You're either not fast enough or the circumstance was inevitable. It's hard to deal with either way. This time around I just wasn't fast enough. The Salem child must have appeared in here, and unaware that it wouldn't attack them, the father sheltered his kid in an attempt to save him. They were roasted before they even knew it. Their bodies resembled that of a crumbling statue, a stark reminder that, like last night, I didn't have much time. Even with all my precautions, I couldn't stay for longer than 30 minutes. I had to find the source, so I swiftly checked from room to room. It's not always obvious, but the source will generally have a magical vibe to it. It could be anything from a crystal to a spell book. Walking through the house, I glanced at their family photos, the father, his son, and the wife, who I hadn't seen yet. She was in all the photos, smiling wider than anyone. They were happy, and at the time I didn't know what she would do if she came home after all this. I was debating in my mind if I should stay in that scenario or take off before she even got home. Everywhere I walked, the Salem child would follow me, small flecks of fire drifting from between his dark lips. The longer it took, the more frustrated I became. I could normally keep my cool, but the damn heat was unbearable. Even the basement had nothing of note in it. Thankfully, the family was rather neat and tidy, so I didn't have to sift through boxes of knickknacks. Something wasn't sitting right with me. I had dealt with a Salem child once before, and it was pretty cut and dry hunt. I popped into some construction site, found the artifact, and destroyed it. That was it. I had a few rooms left to check on the first floor, but as some of the gears began to turn, I made my way back upstairs. Leaning in, I took a closer look at the family photos. The mother, while happy, gave off a very specific vibe. I looked back at the Salem child, knowing my sorrow had not yet finished. I found a small string and pulled down on it. A ladder dropped down, leading up to the attic. I only peeked in to confirm my suspicions. I hate being right sometimes. It was dark, but I could see several spell books and half-burned candles littering the wooden floor. I saw half of a circle drawn on the floor with various symbols placed inside. The source, despite all this, wasn't in the attic. Climbing down, I found a window that looked out upon the backyard, and my heart sank. Looking back at the child, I thought of the trauma that had put his anger here. It's going to be up to her. I hope she sets you free. I'm not a man of many words, and I knew I was essentially talking to myself. Maybe I was just passing the buck. With the Salem child, casually following my movements, I made my way to the backyard, or the field that was a backyard. It was massive and free of any eyesores until the tree line a few dozen feet away. I saw her right away, her hair frizzy and baggy clothing. She had a shovel in her hand and was frantically digging at the dirt. Several other holes told me she'd been at it for a while. The back door swung closed after me and the Salem child stepped off the patio and onto the grass. The wife perked her head up when the door slammed and found me. She'd been crying. Her makeup was an even greater mess than her hair. "I'll find it. It's here somewhere," she stuttered out. I don't know how or why, but she seemed to know the reason why I was visiting. Perhaps it was that I was there at all, letting a burning child follow me around. I didn't know how to respond, and I'm not much for conversation. But if I left her to her own devices, she'd make matters worse. She too was sweating, but it wasn't from the heat. No, she couldn't feel the radiating sauna just yet. "You're not going to find the source," I remarked. The shotgun was rattling around in my shaking hands. "Because it's you," I stated before she could retort. She had been practicing magic and had the unfortunate mishap of practicing it near the buried bodies of a child that had been burned alive when humans were still learning about the oddities of the world. To my surprise, and I suppose relief, she became somber and calm. The three of us stood in silence until I bent over, placing the shotgun onto the grass. There was one more exchange of glances, and I walked away from the two of them. There was a pit in my throat as I walked towards Elvis. The doors swung open, and I sat inside, listening to the quiet the night had to offer. My fingers grasped onto a small golden ring hanging around my chest, knuckles turning white while I tried to sink my feelings down as far as I could. I tell you this because I want you to know how important it is to remain as human as possible, even when the chips are down. The night was silent for what felt like forever, and just as I was worried the Salem child was going to run rampant, or that I was going to have to do something unspeakable, a low crack of gunfire interrupted my thoughts, and the tears welled up in my eyes. It took many long breaths in and out to stop myself from rocking back and forth, because I still had a job to do. I once again left my truck and paced my way around the house to the backyard. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I avoided it as much as possible. Scooping up the Salem child, whose heating had now dissipated, the furnace in his eyes going out. His face now was just a black outline against the night. I'd leave the shotgun with her. It was too close. When the police find her, at least they'll have a rational cause of death for her. Relieved to see that while I was away, my truck hadn't been messed with. I loaded everything up and placed the child gently on the bench seat wrapped in blankets. It felt wrong to just throw him in the truck bed like Roadkill. I turned the truck on and pulled away from the house and left the whole scene behind, all while ignoring the bright yellow eyes I had seen hiding in the tree line. I just wasn't in the mood for anything else. The road back was long, lonely, and it smelled far too much like ash. I took it upon myself after getting home to dig a grave for the child and placed him inside, not only for his sake but for family as well. I was never under the impression that I was going to save every soul that I came across, but it never fails to get under my skin. I'm far too tired, physically and emotionally, to go over anything else, and I just wanted to get to sleep. I hope you all sleep well. Part 5. I'll admit, last night was a rough one on me. Losing something like that reminds me of why I started all of this in the first place. After writing down what I had gone through during the Salem child hunt, I received news that I would be sent as backup for tonight. In my line of business, backup is a corporate way of telling us the last hunter failed, and we were expected to clean up. More often than not, failure was death. Sleep wouldn't have come easy if I wasn't so exhausted, but my dreams didn't pull their punches. I saw her face in every scene. I woke and I went through the throes of my day job, and I'll be honest, nothing really to report. Do you really want me to say I picked up some roadkill day after day? That's not why you're here. I have a lot to write down, and a lot I need to do after I finish writing tonight's entry, so we're going to cut right to the hunt. As I said, it was a backup call. They didn't tell me who, only that a hunter had failed to report back after being sent out. When they told me what I'd be hunting, I wasn't surprised, and only hoped the hunter wasn't someone I respected, because that was only going to make the job harder on me. I've told you before that not all cryptids are bad, and I generally don't take any joy in killing them, but some cryptids, they only exist to make people miserable. The fast jacket is one such evil creature. Even worse, you have to come to them. As long as they have their source of food, they remain in one area until needing to feed again. If I were to guess, I'd say the previous hunter that was sent out to kill the fast jacket during its hunt for food and ended up becoming said food. I couldn't set a trap or even outsmart the thing. This did work in my favour in the department of me needing to take out some very pent-up anger. Back before all this, I would take long drives before I went to work. I need to find peace with my emotions so I could channel them. I was young and far too poetic, but it's become a ritual that I follow to this day. So that's what I did. I and Elvis passed through the winding forest and across amber pastures. I couldn't help but think of all the hunts that I had been to in these places. How I had become as much of the ecosystems as any other wildlife. When I ran out of patience with all my rituals, I turned around and headed to the fast jacket's feeding spot. It was an out-of-service parking garage, located in a construction zone not too far from where I eradicated the Calvia contaminant just 2 nights prior. It's possibly the fast jacket saw the chaos the virus left behind and took advantage of it. Pulling in front of the crumbling grey parking garage, I pulled out a stack of CDs from the visor above my head and fingered through them. When I found the CD I wanted, I let it slide into the player and turned the volume to max. Stepping out, I could hear the speakers on top of the truck buzzing to life with static. I pulled a mesh of copper wire from the truck bed and double-checked my pockets before heading into the building. Starting on the ground floor, I observed the vacant and broken structure before me. Not a single car in sight. It wouldn't be hard to find the fast jacket. I just needed to ascend and take a quick peek until I hit bingo. With each step, I heard either broken glass or chunks of concrete fall apart under my heavy boots. The further I went up, the darker the structure became, as the wind whistled through each level and the staircase I used to climb up. The wind seemed to carry the sound of static coming from my truck below. Floor 2 was empty. Floor 3 was empty. Floor 4 was empty. Floor 5 is where the fast jacket had decided to begin eating its prey. I almost missed it despite it being only blemish of shadow on the empty floor. It was hunched over several feet away from the stairwell. I walked over, and when I was close enough, I threw the copper wire onto the concrete. It didn't make much noise, but the fast jacket noticed regardless. It rose to its feet and turned to me, a moniker of intelligence being shown in its movements. Almost human, but still infantile. I could see its wriggling skin in the building's shade. Perhaps that's not the right way to describe it. Imagine you brought a skin-tight suit that covered every inch of you. Imagine that suit mimicked the colour of your skin. Imagine it had consciousness and was eating your body under it at a snail's pace. That it left you alive but unable to move of your own volition. That's a fast jacket. Until it finds a host, it might as well be a piece of pink gum sitting under a school desk. When it finds something to eat, it wraps around their body completely, looking like some beefed up and featureless Ken doll. The fast jacket is made entirely of muscle, and it gets its consciousness from its host, which it will pilot like a puppet. You can see the muscle moving around, contracting and vibrating as it would eat away at its food. Thousands of microscopic teeth grating away at what's under it like sandpaper. The more muscle the host has, the better. So people like hunters would be a delicacy to this thing. Where the host face would be is blank, save for a few surgical-like cuts that open and close like heart valves, allowing the host to get oxygen. These guys are non-stop killers. They feed, move on, and feed again. They have no selection process and will often use their host to kill the next piece of food. It's a disgusting cycle, and I could tell looking at the thing another hunter was underneath. I heard the static from below kick out for a moment. Perfect timing. I pulled my jacket off and let it fall to the floor. The fast jacket likely thinking it's found its next meal. Reaching into my jeans, I pulled a set of bronze knuckle dusters out and slipped my fingers into them. As a fast jacket is comprised completely of muscle and most of its mobility comes from the host it takes on, there aren't many ways to deal with it. Bullets seem largely ineffective as the skin constricts when shot and the bullets simply don't pierce. Bronze, however, burns the damn thing. A mixture of pressure and bronze will singe its flesh and deprive its ability to puppet the body if enough of it is applied, that is. The fast jacket, making its way walking in a half circle to avoid the wire I had dropped. Then it started. A familiar song started to play from my radio speakers. I closed my eyes and for just a moment I could hear the roaring crowd. I was back 5 years, if only for a brief moment. Are there other ways to deal with a fast jacket? Sure, I knew of a few. Is this how I chose to do it anyway? Yes. Almost by muscle memory, I closed my fist and put my arms up, guarding my chest, knees buckled, and my stance widened. With my entrance song cascading into the building, the fast jacket lunged forward and took a swing at me. Aggressive things they are. My head and chest lowered in response until I was under the thing's attack. 2 swift jabs once from each arm fired out like pistons. It had been so long I was surprised my body remembered how to do this. The bronze left a burn mark on it and a small trail of smoke lifted from each impact point. It reacted and stumbled back from me, which is a superb way to lose your footing, especially if you're just piloting a human. My footwork, just as I had many times before, quickly closed the distance it created. Still bent over, I sprung my body up and arched my right arm above my head, landing a hard uppercut to the jaw. Some of its wriggling mass tore off and dropped to the ground. A bizarre attempt at manipulating the hunter's vocal cords created this babbling and stuttered speech, similar to the ramblings of a child. All the cuts that adorned his face flared open, revealing the hunter's face under it. It stumbled and threw another swing. My torso drifted back, letting the fist pass right by my face. Altering my momentum, I shot forward, and I plunged a right hook straight into his face, throwing it to the floor. As it squirmed around, I walked over to pick up the copper wire. I could feel its presence as I bent over, looming over me. It had gotten up far faster than I expected. Before I could react, and lifted its toes into my stomach, nearly smacking my ribcage, whose bones would surely be busted. I got too cocky. That was ingrained in my muscles from back then too. Locked away under all the concussions and broken bones. I moved swiftly to get back in stance, but my favour was returned, and I felt a hard blow to my face. I could hear my nose giving way under the pressure, an all too familiar crack. My body hit the ropes. It hit concrete. It started throwing hands at me like a desperate drunk, but a drunk that was much stronger than me. Blows landed hard all over my body. I could taste a pool of dark red iron building around my tongue. I kept my arms up as best as I could, but the thing was too unpredictable. I remember what my team would say to me in these situations, something stupid like, "If you're not down on the mat, you're not out." I pulled forward and wrapped my arms around its arms, squeezing as hard as I could, and pushed away from the pillar. I could feel it moving around under me, its skin constantly shifting like a gel-filled balloon. Letting go, I quickly threw a right hook. It connected. Follow up, left fist slamming into its side. Keep going, don't get cocky. I needed to overclock its functions. Its inertia was in my hands after the second hit. It wouldn't know how to back off or to switch things up. If I kept hitting, I was in control. Fuck this thing. My body became a machine, bobbing and weaving, arms like pistons throwing out shot after shot, each one as powerful as the last. I wouldn't notice how much the knuckles were ripping up my skin until afterwards. Once again the thing fell to the concrete. This time I pounced on it and I proceeded to pummel its face, the burns from the smoke sending plumes of smoke into my eyes. My song was long over, the fight was long over. With all my aggression out, I stood up and returned to the wire. With it, I wrapped the fast jacket up. The wire would be enough to keep it dormant until I got it home and used a more permanent solution. The trek down the stairs was eye-opening, making me come to terms with just how much damage the fast jacket did in its flurry. I'll be purple all over come sunrise. Placing the fast jacket where I normally threw those things, the radio went off and the truck turned on. I began my drive home. I was in a bit of a rush, wanting to get home and soak in a nice hot bath and take care of the skin in my truck bed. I wasn't being careful. I was spending too much and watching the road too little. I could have seen it. One moment I was watching my headlights covering the road. The next I could see the pavement moving to the hood as the truck flipped over. My hood slammed onto the pavement after my hang time was over. The seatbelt tightened and rubbed far too many of my injuries. Frantically, I unbuckled my seatbelt, sending me falling. Between the fight and this wreck, my body was totaled. Looking out the shattered windshield, I could see the one working headlight, its illumination sparking against a spiderweb-like network of thick cables. I reached for my shotgun and dragged myself out of the busted driver's side window, glass cutting against my skin, giving me further lacerations. Once on the pavement, I looked over myself. Cuts and patches of blood stained my shirt and jeans. My breathing became hard to control as I tried to collect my surroundings. Looking back to the cables, I was met with a figure basking in the glow of the truck's flickering headlight. "Couldn't have been clearer," a wispy dark voice claimed. The light bounced off his dark purple skin, most of which was hidden under a formal, buttoned-up black duster, his bright yellow eyes glowing under the rim of his dark cowboy-like hat. "You just had to stop, my boy." My fingers scrambled back to the shotgun. I heard a disapproving click of the tongue from the man, and my arm seized up. I couldn't move it an inch, and before I knew it, the man's fingers wrapped around my shoulder. "Not that those bullets would do much damage. Consider it conservation of your supplies." Looking up, now on my knees and powerless to move, he was towering over my somehow paralyzed frame. I had just gone a few rounds with a writhing mass of muscle, and whatever this thing was, shut me down with just a touch. I was searching through everything I knew about cryptids for an answer, but nothing rang a bell. Instead, I asked a question, what he wanted from me, and why he wanted it. "I want you to stop hunting," he said, as he let go of my shoulder and began to pace around my crash site. My body became lax the moment he let me free of whatever control he had. "You and your people are messing with the natural order," he boomed. A layer of rage was bubbling just under his calm demeanour. He looked briefly at my neck. I was thinking he was observing the chair and the ring that hung from it. He sighed like he was generally upset with the situation. I couldn't get a read on him. Whatever your motivation, you must forget it, because next time you and I meet... He looked over at Elvis, wrecked and twisted. Only one of us will be leaving the scene, and I'm not placing my bets on you, Jack. He then turned and began to walk away from me. I wanted more than anything to put a spread of bullets into his back. Before the thought even crossed my mind, he was long gone. I had been watching him the entire time, and even now I can't recall the moment he vanished. I can't help but feel he wasn't some cryptid, but I can't for the life of me come up with another explanation. I stayed in that road until my knees started to burn. I would just swivel my head back and forth, looking at the scattered remains of my truck. Looking at the fast jacket that had been ejected from the truck bed during the crash, I had to do something with it. The copper wire wouldn't last forever, and I wouldn't be winning any fights. I dragged myself to my knees and hopped over to the creature. Grabbing its feet, I started pulling. The wire scraped against the pavement for the last half mile that it took to get home. My body reacted like I was been hiking an entire week straight. Every effort to drag the fast jacket another foot was met with painful resistance. I did make it home, and the fast jacket made it into the cold storage where its feeding would be frozen until I could properly take care of it. I'm writing to you now, and I don't know what to do. I want to tell myself that on a good day I could take the purple man down. That's what I'm calling him. The trap he set was a show of intelligence, capability, and power. He wanted me to know how many leagues above me he was. I want to get back out there and hunt the things they prey on the innocents. But if my next hunt is my last, is there a point? Will he even let me leave the house tomorrow? I want to be able to keep talking to you folks, but as I stare out my back window, I see two graves. Two different parts of my life are buried back there, and right now I can't return to either one of them, not without losing more. I called the tow truck. They went down and picked up Elvis as best as they could. I'm tending to my wounds the best I can right now as well. I've gone through nearly an entire bottle of rubbing alcohol and a few bottles of harder alcohol. I was under the impression I was the type that lives to work. So what if I'm unable to get back out there? The roadkill job is fine, but at the end of the day, it's empty. Knowing I was helping people in some crazy capacity, even if they never knew. Knowing I was at least giving these creatures a way out, was most of them, was a surreal feeling. It was a good run, but I'm beaten. Sorry guys, I'm done. Good night. Goodbye. Jack. Part 6. The finale. If you're not down on the mat, you're not out. I spent a good long time thinking after I wrote my last entry. It's morning now. Feels weird writing this so early. Normally the sun is either long gone or it's just coming up. I didn't sleep much. Seems to be a running theme lately. I sat in my yard for a good long while. I sat and talked with her. I remembered the pain, how it didn't compare to the bruises I suffered. Most cryptids aren't out to hurt people, but when they do, I'm called in. I started doing this to help others escape my pains. My emotions have settled, and while it's not the most rational thought that could have entered my mind, I was knocked down, my back was on the mat, and the 10 count was ringing in my ear. I still have one last push in me, because the purple man isn't going to just stop at me. He'll move on to other hunters and beat them into submission, or outright kill them. I wasn't just giving up a lifestyle if I decided to stop. I was putting others at risk. I spent so much time hunting down cryptids, learning their ins and outs, what to avoid and what to exploit. As I sat in the backyard with her, I couldn't help but shift my gaze to the cold storage and think of the cryptids I had recently caught. About how I would go about setting a trap that stood a chance of overpowering the purple man. Lucky for me, I already had the perfect bait. He would be coming to me. I've got a lot of work to do before I head out tonight. I'm going to be spending all day in cold storage. I'll write what happens tonight should I make it back. As I said, I spent a good long time surrounded by the cryptids I had hunted in the past week, tinkering away at anything that could give me an advantage, but nothing I had was going to be enough to put it down. While I didn't know for sure, I needed to go overboard and plan for something big to happen. I'd need more than just some clever tools. I'd need help. I pulled a dusty blue tarp away from the motorcycle that had been sitting dormant since I started the roadkill work. To my complete elation, the girl started up, purring to life. The gear I had prepared wasn't heavy or troublesome, apart from the small speaker and microphone I had strung to my back. The rest was all a roll of the dice, something I'd never done before, but with light getting low I had to start. The motorcycle took me away from the house for what could have been the last time. I drove for miles before coming across them again, a roaming group of jobbins deep enough in the woods that their red lights were barely visible from the road. Putting the kickstand down, I let myself breathe and then began what was going to be a very long night. All while I worked, I could feel the sensation of being observed, every step judged. Even as I grabbed a sturdy branch and wrapped it with an old t-shirt, dousing it in lighter fluid with a small drop of vanilla, I felt gaze. With the branch lit, I guided the pack trying to back away from the fire, humming their tune ever so gingerly. They would zip around me, filling the gaps between the trees with a brilliant strobe of red lighting. When we reached the road, I quickly extinguished the flame and put down a small berry-scented candle. With the wick lit, they should be attracted to it for long enough. I had no idea how long it would take for the purple man to show up, if he wasn't already there waiting for me to slip up. I was acting fast, but trying to remain aware of my surroundings, even through the song of the jobbins. I placed the microphone under the red choir and then the speaker as far away in the brush as the cord would allow. With leaves and brush I did my best to hide the speaker. If that would do any good, I didn't know. I stepped back to make sure everything was in place and then I waited. He would come. I didn't want to kill a jobbin and he knew that. He wouldn't let that happen. And sure enough, closing my eyes to blink just for a brief moment was enough time for him to slip into view when my eyes reopened. He stood on the opposite side of the jobbins. A pack of red lights separated us. Same duster wrapping his body. I could see him clear as day now, not only from the glow of the jobbins, but because of the furball's incredible eyesight. They were wildly uncomfortable to wear, but what makes the furball's eyesight so powerful isn't in how their pupils receive light. In fact, their eyes are absent of pupils. Instead, their eyes have a glass-like shell that manipulates the light going into it, warping small beams of light into something more powerful. It took a while to sand the outside layer down to find a fit that I could live with. It was actually the hardest process of the night. So with the layer of glass twisting and amplifying light sources and my pupils receiving it, it's a generous billow of light. The purple man stood before me clear as day. I could now see small dark markings like symbols running up his neck and presumably the rest of his body. "What are you doing here, Jack?" he asked me, almost sounding exasperated. I replied softly that I was on the hunt. "That's it, what I do." A billow of laughter. "And here I thought you were some badass, but killing jobbins? Sad," he mocked, stepping forward. The red bugs drifted gently out of his way, a red sea of sorts. "They really gave you the short stick tonight." The grin he had plastered on his face quickly shifted when I told him that my hunt tonight wasn't for the jobbins and that I wasn't here on business. A curious eyebrow pushed his dark hat up ever so slightly. "Alright, Jack, if that's how it's going to be. he drifted out of my vision and back again, placing his open palm onto my shoulder. I felt his clawed fingers pushing me down, a familiar feeling of my body disobeying my orders to stand. My knees smacked against the road, and we were just as it was the night before. Except the road was much cleaner, and I hadn't fallen into his trap. He'd fallen into mine. With all the strength I could manage, I pushed a small syringe into my skin. My mind drifted into thoughts about how it felt plunging my shovel into the dirt I had just moved a couple of days ago, how it felt to pull the Salem child from his grave. It filled me with shame to have defiled his grave, but with my thumb pressing on the syringe plunger, shame was replaced with fire. The Salem child's blood would burn under his skin until he decayed in his grave. The burning blood coursed through my veins. A noticeable glow began to wrap around my body. The purple man took curious notice. "What are you?" His question interrupted when my hand clasped around his wrist. I couldn't control the vicious and angry growl that shook my body, spitting blood to the road. Blood that had been swelling from the chunk I took out of my lip. The pain of the burning blood introduced to my body was a white-hot intensity that I had never felt before. Nothing before compared to the pain rushing through my body. Focusing slowly on the pain, as I had hoped, I was able to override whatever the purple man did to shut me down. My movements were jagged and stuttered, but I was able to raise myself up to the purple man's eye level. He looked at glare and his face contorted to something like a child who'd received a new plaything. The word "incredible" mumbled out from behind his shark teeth. He pulled his other arm up and levelled his fingers, making a sort of spear with hand. He plunged his spear hard into my chest. When he was met with resistance, when he didn't even make it through my new jacket's leather-like exterior, he scoffed. I needed to dissect the fast jacket anyway. I used a knife coated in bronze to perform a crude autopsy and free the man underneath, who was uncomfortably long gone. When I removed the fast jacket completely, I had taken note that where my bronze made contact, the fast jacket's body had burnt and became a rough, dark leather. I said before I'm not much for art and crafts, but I was able to do a half-decent job, sewing the fast jacket's burnt skin into a jacket. The prospect of wearing this thing around was revulsive, but it worked. The purple man couldn't penetrate the fast jacket, even burnt as it was. In response to this, the purple man backed away from me and observed my form, looking for other tricks up my sleeve, no doubt. He noticed the small handmade handle being held at my side by the pant's leg. "You got something to kill me, bud?" he asked. I replied by lifting a small bone-white knife from my hip, or rather, a fang. Pulling the marwolf's largest fang from his body was the easiest of the processes, but vital. Their teeth can pierce and rip apart just about anything, and if bullets or pellets weren't going to do the job, the fang would get it done. Out of my left pocket, I retrieved a small vial full of green liquid. Body still shaking from the burning blood, I smashed the vial over the fang, spilling its thick green over the smooth white. I stumbled forward at first, but once regaining my footing, the small knife was thrust forward and plunged into the purple man's chest. The fang pierced right through his clothing and skin as if I had just assaulted the air. He laughed once more, for good reason. He was confident that the small knife, even if it had broke his skin, wasn't enough to deal much damage, especially if he were to regenerate as half these cryptids do. In his arrogance though, he did let himself get cocky. I understood. I've been there 100 times before. The fang only served as a delivery method, as the fang made it to the purple man's interior. Drops of the green liquid also made their way in. Once it's doused in antibiotics and burned, the caliver's contaminant becomes a dormant virus and loses the ability to spread spores as its insides are dissolved into a paste. If the mass is kept on ice, said paste will not be toxic, but As it heats up, it begins to reactivate. It's still an incredibly potent virus, but the only way to become infected would be to ingest the virus, or have it introduced to your body's inner workings. The purple man caught wind quickly. The virus was heating up inside his body and attacking everything it could. He snarled at me. The first time he seemed more beast than man, but it wasn't enough. I knew it wasn't. Even as I watched him drop to his knees, clutching feverishly at his chest, I knew there wasn't anything I alone could do to kill him. His body was fighting the virus, and it was winning. In the short time it was in him, I could see that he was becoming calmer. I didn't have long. If I tried cutting his head off of anything of the sorts, I would simply run out of time. My jacket protected my torso and did it well, but my legs and head wouldn't be so lucky. The jobbins had started to migrate away, the candle's wick becoming black and bare, but they were still close enough. With all the anguish the burning blood had distilled in me, I hobbled over to the speaker hiding in the brush, and with the click of a button the microphone picked up on the jobbin's song and amplified it. The song spread out like a shockwave, filling the forest around us with a most irritating hum. As the purple man continued in the clutches of the virus, slowly winning it over, I walked over to my motorcycle and started it up. The purr was drowned out completely by the song I and the purple man were wrapped in. I had no idea what this man was, and while I intended to look into it more, I knew he wasn't the top of the food chain. With all his snark and passive attitude, sometimes you just can't beat out pure pound for pound strength. It wasn't the hum of the bike's motor that was rumbling the road beneath my feet. The purple man felt it too. I could see it in his eyes, and I took one more glance. They were almost pleading, not for him, for me. Even in the lavish darkness of the defeat, he wept for me. It's too late. Nothing I or he could do would turn back time on what was about to occur. There is a very important rule that I broke tonight, and by all accounts, I shouldn't be typing this now. If something can throw a tree at you, don't fuck with it. As I saddled onto the bike, I watched the purple man's head quickly turn to the side of the road. The train was at its station. A hulking 9-foot tall, 700-pound blur crashed down on the purple man. Miraculously, the screams he let out rose above the songs. A desperate cry. They aren't violent. They aren't really. When you turn what's normally a sign of nearby food into an ear-splitting siren call, however, they might go a little ape. I wanted to watch what the hair-plastered behemoth would do to the purple man, but if I waited around too long, I'd fall victim as well. I had enough of being that. Taking a quick U-turn, I looked back to see, through the furball's eyes, a massive fist, big as a boulder, mercilessly slamming the purple man's head into the pavement, the ground vibrating with every strike. That was enough for me. I drove as fast as I could away from the scene. Thankfully the song was masking the motor. I wouldn't have to worry about cleanup. The big man would smash the speaker and likely use the purple man for food, though it wouldn't be much. Never been that close to one before. Its brown hair was surprisingly kempt. Shame I didn't get to see its face. But that's for the best. It didn't see mine either. I didn't need to piss it off more than I already had, if that was possible. I'm home now, safe for the time being. I removed my jacket and contacts. I pulled all the items away in cold storage, save for the poison. I wanted to bury them, but I might need them again. You have to have that kind of foresight in this line of work. I was spending a good amount of time slowly getting the burning blood to pour from me so my body can replace it with a less painful red. I don't know what to do next. I think maybe I'm going to take a break. The last few days have beaten me up pretty bad, and while tonight went better than I could have hoped, I am still lost with what I'm doing. The purple man seemed to care more for cryptids and had a hatred for me that went beyond knowing I was hunting them. Like he was angry at the whole system, not to mention the markings on his skin. A shame I won't be able to retrieve his body now that I think about it. I apologise if you guys expected more from me. Maybe there will be. I'm taking a vacation from all this and going somewhere nice and warm for a while. There are things I need to look into, and if I discover anything interesting, I'll be sure to contact a lot of you. Thank you for the support and interest in my line of work. You are all part of what reminded me of it, and what it means to lose something and how important it is to protect what you still have. I buried the Salem child once again, next to my wife, just as before. I loved her, and it's hard to admit, but there was once a time I wasn't able to protect her. I didn't know how to bring it up to you guys. I didn't think it was information that was even needed. Well, anyways, I became what I am because something took her from me, something I didn't understand at the time. I wish the man I am now was able to be back there for her back then, but I wasn't. I figured if I'm leaving you guys for a while, I should tell you that at least. She always told me I needed to take a break every now and then, so here's to you, baby. Elise V. Isaacs, my Elvis. Wow, that was a fantastic story. And if you enjoyed listening to this chronicle, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile, author Jojo, and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. And if you enjoyed my narration, then please feel free to like and share the video, leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Please be so kind as to visit our merchandise store and grab yourself a t-shirt, face mask, mug, hoodie, or whatever else grabs your fancy. There's plenty there to choose from. The link will be in the description. And if you'd like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase from the merch store and I'll feature it in one of my videos. You can submit your stories and encounters to cryptidsroost@gmail.com. And if you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. Now I've also got a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit, and you'll also find me on Discord. And if you'd like to support this channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Again, that'll also be below. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.